Welcome to another one of our regular series of educational webinars. We are Focus Point Technologies, and we provide privacy and security solutions to the Upper Midwest. My name is Kathy Washenberger, and I'm the CIO of Focus Point Technologies. My background, my passion is all around the aspects of data privacy, data protection, cybersecurity, and overall information risk management. Today, we're going to talk about security maturity. This is the first in our security maturity webinar series that's really designed to provide practical ways to improve your information security program. You see here that we have 3 different webinars listed. This particular one's going to focus on the first step, where we really explore proven methods to jumpstart your program. Others are going to focus on common issues faced, such as making sure you have the right funding in place, making sure you have the correct governance in place to continue to mature over time. So with that, let's go ahead and get started on how to jumpstart your program. Today, we're going to talk about really the challenges around this, whether you are just getting started or whether you are accelerating an existing program. We want to explain some of the reasons why this has been a real challenge for organizations of all sizes. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the understanding what the problem with or the framework is and how that relates to your organization. So here we're going to cover a holistic strategy that really includes 4 main sections. We're going to talk about governance, compliance, operations, and also your technology or environmental areas. We're going to walk through some of the various levels of maturity where you may fall on this stepped approach so you can start to chart your progress. We're going to talk through a roadmap to get started. Certainly, I love to talk through some of those common pitfalls that I have experienced, that I've seen other organizations experience, where we really need to avoid those things. And then finally, what that call of action is to get your program jump started. We're going to do all this in a pretty short time frame, so it is definitely manageable for you to listen to and take some things away from and provide some real value. So let's get started with the challenge. Here's a few of the most common challenges that are facing organizations related to privacy and security programs today. So let's say you're just getting started. You know you need to establish processes, policy, protection, etc. But where do you start? There's a ton out there related to privacy and security, and it's really hard to sift through some of that information that you're receiving from all angles. Perhaps you might have some basic pieces covered already, but you need to demonstrate that you are making progress and that you're continuing to mature. One example I'm hearing pretty frequently is where a company has recently suffered from an incident. I certainly won't say the B word, the breach word, but leadership all of a sudden is really interested in security, so you've got to show that you are making this a priority. Another one is where you've recently realized you have some compliance or regulatory controls that have to be in place, and you're relatively new to the topic. A common one there is the EU's GDPR, and a lot of organizations are a little bit behind in that and realizing that they have to do something quickly. And one of my favorites is you've done a really good job in other areas of IT. So now you've been voluntold to solve the cybersecurity or privacy issues as well. So those are some of the challenges that you're facing. And let's talk a little bit now about what you need to do to move things forward. So all organizations have some legal or regulatory compliance requirements. Compliance is usually one of the biggest drivers behind security programs, simply because there's fines involved in a lot of them. So as soon as you start talking about monetary penalties, it's a big deal. Included in this slide is a mix of common security acronyms. Some are focused on compliance, like DFARS, which is controls related to the Department of Defense, PCI, controls related to credit card data, GDPR, I mentioned that already, but that has to do with personally identifiable data around EU or the European Union citizens. And there's more. And also some of the acronyms here are related to the security frameworks that can be used to guide the programs. Some of my favorites are ISO and NIST. Let's talk a little bit about what a program or a framework would actually look like. This is Focus Point Technologies program, and this is what we use as a baseline for our security services. But really, it's really focused on the ISO and NIST frameworks. So when you look at this, it provides a really brief and pictorial overview of what a strategic security and privacy program would need to actually be able to move forward and to be holistic. This program is comprehensive. It looks at all of the various areas that need to be considered. It's aligned with those industry frameworks that I mentioned, and it really focuses on the entire life cycle of people, process, and product, because you can't just have one. You have to look at that entire life cycle. So we'll quickly cover some of the highlights. From a governance standpoint, I have an entire webinar dedicated to this topic. It's the basis for any good program. It identifies your stakeholders, your key processes, policies. You cannot have a mature program without it. Compliance is another area that focuses not only on regulatory compliance, but also the processes around any internal audit or security compliances that you have or should have in place. Also, this is the area where business continuity and vendor management compliances also reside. Operations is a common thing in the area around security. Many times it's called the Security Operations Center, or SOC. It focuses on the day-to-day operations around privacy and security. As a side note, there are many, many vendors out there who provide this as an outsourced service. There's quite a few companies with a small staff or a less mature security program who will go that route, and certainly that is a viable option. I have recommendations based on your company size and maturity program, and I'd be happy to talk more about that. So contact me for more information there if you're interested in what other organizations are doing and some of the vendors that are being used. So finally, in this diagram is the technology or environment. This is the technical environment that supports your organization, from tools to hardware to the cloud, and of course, the processes that manage those different things. So you really need to look holistically, I'll keep using that word, that all of these areas are considering the technology, the staffing, and the processes, or that entire life cycle that's included in a privacy and security program. I'll quit beating this to death now, but it's definitely something that you're going to want for your organization to ground yourself in if you don't currently have this already. So let's talk a little bit about those maturity definitions. So there's quite a bit on this slide, but really what I'm trying to show is that there are different levels of maturity when you're talking about a privacy and security program. So if you are just getting started, you're probably at that minimal level where there's really little focus on security. There's a low support from the organization as a whole and the leadership, or you may or may not have dedicated people focusing on privacy and security. So many organizations, however, are at that foundational level where you know security is important. They have some base level controls and policies in place. You might even have some dedicated staff for security support, but you really need to move that dial. You may also need to gain additional organizational or leadership support for privacy and security. So many people, like I said, are at that level 2 area. If you're at that defined stage, you're moving forward. You're pretty much well on your way to growing your program. Perhaps what you're looking at doing is simply accelerating the pace to keep up with the changes in technology. And, certainly risk is changing constantly in organizations and the industry today. So it's definitely a place that you might need to focus. So if you're up in that managed and optimized maturity categories, I assume you aren't watching this webinar. So that said, there's always room to mature because the bad guys are always maturing their ways to attack. And I can talk about that separately as well around some of the ways that you can mature even if you're up at that managed or optimized levels. So let's talk about some of the next steps to get started down this path. So you absolutely must understand your business. The leaders need to be involved. They need to understand their priorities. You need to understand their priorities. And there needs to be a good feel for the support of privacy and security as a whole. So I would just suggest that you would actually complete a stakeholder assessment to map these things and understand who your champions are, who may feel it's important, who may feel it's not so important as compared to their priorities. It happens all the time, and it's very common. But by involving the business, you're also going to start to understand the company's risk tolerance as it relates to privacy and security. In other words, what the company's risk tolerance from a resource spend staffing perspective is as it relates to managing security, privacy, and risk. And this is going to vary greatly. And it's really never a one size fits all when you're talking to various organizations, depending on what their crown jewels are. So let's talk about that a little bit. You really need to identify the things that are most important to the business of your organization. So what are the crown jewels? It could be IP data, intellectual property. It could be the health information or financial information. It could be specific locations that your company is operating in. It can be compliance-driven items. It could be as simple as your company brand. So these items need to be identified up front so that you can start to prioritize where you want to put your controls from a security and privacy standpoint. So depending on the time you want to spend, the things you already know, the mandates you've been given, etc., you might need to assess your current environment. Well, you're going to need to assess it, but you could go and do an extremely thorough, in-depth assessment, gap analysis, prioritization activity that could last a very long time. And what I'm suggesting you do is you've got some of that basic information. The people in your company have some of that information already. So if you're really looking to jumpstart things, you're going to want to do some interviews or some workshops with those key individuals to really identify the big things. Where are the gaping holes in your environment? Where do you need to process, or where do you need processes to actually improve? And where do you need policies or other controls to really make a difference? So perhaps it's as simple as beginning to educate employees. Whatever those objectives might be, this is where you're going to need to really do that assessment up front, but it doesn't have to be a long, drawn-out initiative. So let's talk a little bit about some of the pitfalls or the things to consider here. So many people are going to start off with security or security technologies. There's a lot of vendors out there that are selling technologies that are trying to, tell you how they can monitor incidents and track incidents and automatically protect your organization. So really, back up a little bit on that and really understand what that business case is and what the ROI is for your organization. If you understand the business and the things that are important to the business, the risk tolerance, etc., you'll be fine. If you don't do that, you're absolutely going to be doomed to failure. Excuse me. This really includes the ROI or the return on investment. You might not have a tangible return on investment this early in the game, and that's why they call it risk management. But you're really managing the risk to the organization. So don't go and ask for $1 million for technology without doing the due diligence of assessing and prioritizing from a business standpoint. Technology is absolutely great, but if you cannot automate your processes as they sit today. In other words, you don't want to automate your bad processes. If you don't have good processes in place, don't buy the technology to try to automate things that are there. Try to make some small improvements and celebrate your successes. Don't try to boil the ocean or make crazy commitments that you'll be secure in 12 to 18 months, because really security is circular. It's not linear. You're never truly done. It's all about maturing and improving, and really making sure that the program is growing at the pace for your company. Make sure that you're leveraging the people who are on your side. When you go ahead and do that stakeholder analysis and you determine who's supportive, use them to your advantage. Ask leaders to publicly promote privacy and security, and that alone will be advertising enough to start to build it throughout the organization. One of the biggest things I see is where they use that FUD factor. Many people will use that fear, uncertainty, and doubt factor to sell people on the need for privacy and security. Really just use the facts. Be transparent. Companies and their boards need to remember that ultimately they are responsible for their own security. A security leader cannot shoulder that responsibility alone. So if there's not a culture of security within that organization or the willingness to introduce a culture of security, then the program could also be doomed to failure, and watch out for that. Finally, if there's one thing you take away today, remember that there is no silver bullet. Whether it's technology, whether it is a policy process, whether it is any of those silver bullet type things that you may think are out there, know that this is a process. Go back to your priorities, go back to the existing technologies that you currently have in place, leverage what you have. Many times processes are lacking. So, make sure that you have those in place as well. For instance, do you have an adequate patching process? If not, start there. Start with your basic processes and policies. Technologies are going to come around and claim that they can prevent attacks and that they can make sure that you are absolutely protected and that your staff will not have to do much in that area. Be very wary of that. And that's also an area where I would love to talk more. If you're in the middle of doing some technology evaluations, I can definitely provide some good information around the vetting process that we've used here at Focus Point to be able to right size or right fit the technology for your organization. So with that, I want to thank you for your time today. Feel free to contact me directly with any questions that you have, whether it's about this presentation, about some of the things that we talked about within the presentation, or other privacy and security issues that you're facing. This is definitely my passion, and I'm more than happy to discuss. I have had multiple conversations with large organizations. I have also worked as a CISO in organizations, so I have been there and done that. And I am definitely available to help you in yours as well. So thanks again for your time, and have a great day.